What if the answers have been sitting inside government files this whole time, and the only reason you haven't seen them is because no one wants you to? Not rumors, not theories, actual documents. Names that were allegedly written down by victims themselves. And yet, when the question was finally asked live, in front of everyone, the response didn't clear anything up. It made things even more confusing. Because in that moment, when Congressman Thomas Massie started reading from those files, something shifted. And the way Kash Patel responded, that's what has people talking right now.
Gentleman, yes, back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I've got 4 documents I'd like to introduce into the record. The first one is Jeffrey Epstein's sick story played out for years in plain sight. And Acosta is quoted in here saying, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." The second document is entitled, "What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections." The third document is from Fox Digital. It's titled, "Epstein's Private Calendar Reveals Planned Meetings with Obama Admin Official CIA Chief." And the last document is Wall Street Journal article that highlights Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the former Prime Minister of Israel and head of military intelligence for Israel. It may have held that title when he met Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, "You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself?" You replied, according to the transcript, "There is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else." You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information, and we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said all
I named one
information-
today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Gentleman
consent
yields back.
request.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce an unsigned memorandum from July 7th, 2025 that says we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties with the insignia of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Without objection.
Because it wasn't just what he said, it was what he couldn't say. And once you hear the full exchange, you'll understand why this story is blowing up everywhere. IT started like a normal hearing, the kind most people never watch all the way through. Quiet room, formal tone, routine questions. But Massie didn't come in with routine questions. He came in with documents. Not one, not two, multiple pieces of evidence that he wanted entered into the record. Articles, reports, references that all pointed to the same uncomfortable direction. He laid them out one by one, calmly, methodically, almost like he knew exactly where this was going. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, just a steady build. And that's what made it more intense. Because when someone speaks like that, you know they're not guessing. They're building a case that he referenced reports suggesting that Jeffrey Epstein's activities weren't just isolated, that there were connections, meetings, and interactions that raised serious questions. Some reports even mentioned possible intelligence ties, though those claims remain unverified and highly debated. But Massie wasn't trying to prove every rumor. He was doing something more strategic. He was setting the stage. Because the real focus wasn't the headlines, it was the files. Specifically, the FBI documents known as FD 302s. These are records created from interviews, often with witnesses or victims. And according to what Massie laid out, those documents allegedly contain something that changes everything. That's when he shifted gears. No more setup. Straight to the point. He reminded Patel of something he had said earlier, that there was no credible information suggesting Epstein trafficked victims to other individuals. And that's where the tension started to rise. Because Massie immediately challenged that claim. He pointed out that the earlier investigations Patel referenced were limited geographically and legally, that they didn't cover everything, that they didn't include all the material now available. And then he dropped the line that made the entire room pause. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI, those 302 documents detail at least 20 men. Not vague figures, not unknown individuals. Specific people, described in ways that made it clear they held power. A high-profile banker, a former government official, a figure in the music industry, a royal connection, multiple billionaires, even a well-known business executive. The kind of names that, if confirmed, would shake institutions. And Massie didn't pretend to know every identity. In fact, he said clearly, he doesn't know who all of them are. But he emphasized something else. The FBI does, and that's where everything shifted from information to confrontation. Because once that statement was made, there was only one question left. If those names exist in FBI files, what's being done about them? It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was direct. Have you launched any investigations? Have you reviewed those documents? And suddenly, the room didn't feel routine anymore. It felt like something real was happening. Patel's response started carefully. He explained that he had instructed FBI agents to review the files, that any credible information would lead to action, that the Bureau would work with Congress. It sounded structured, professional, controlled. But then came the moment that caught everyone's attention. When asked directly if he had personally reviewed the 302 documents, the ones where victims allegedly named individuals, his answer was simple. No, not personally. That single admission changed everything. Because now the question wasn't just about what the FBI knows. It became about who has actually seen it. How can you say there's no credible information if you haven't personally reviewed the material being referenced? That's the gap Massie immediately focused on. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just asked the question again, from a different angle. Are you saying the victims weren't credible? Are you saying their statements didn't meet the standard? Because if the files exist, and if the statements are in them, then something doesn't add up. Patel pushed back, but carefully. He pointed to previous investigations, multiple U.S. attorney offices, different administrations. He emphasized that these materials had already been reviewed in the past, that decisions had been made based on those reviews. But that answer didn't fully close the gap, because Massie wasn't asking about the past. He was asking about now, about whether anything new was being done with the information currently available. And that's where the exchange became even more uncomfortable, because the more Patel explained, the more it sounded like a system relying on previous conclusions rather than re-examining new details. And in a case like this, where public interest is already intense, that kind of answer doesn't settle concerns, it amplifies them. Especially when the discussion involves victims who, according to these claims, provided names and details directly to investigators. It creates a situation where the audience is left wondering whether the issue is lack of evidence or lack of action. And then, just as the conversation reached that point, Massie pivoted again, this time to something even more uncertain. Intelligence connections, reports, articles, claims that Epstein may have had ties beyond what has been publicly confirmed. Again, these are not established facts, and Massie didn't present them as such. But he raised the question anyway. Has the FBI investigated any potential intelligence links? Is there a CIA file? And if there is, has anyone seen it? That question changed the tone completely. Because now the uncertainty wasn't just about individuals, it was about institutions. Patel's response reflected that shift. He didn't confirm the existence of any such file. In fact, he framed the question itself as speculative, saying it presumes something that may not exist. But he also left the door open. If such information exists, and if it hasn't been shared, then the FBI would look at it. It was a careful answer, one that avoided confirming anything while not fully dismissing the possibility. But that kind of answer doesn't end speculation. It fuels it. Because when something isn't clearly confirmed or denied, people start filling in the gaps themselves. And in a story already filled with unanswered questions, that only adds to the intrigue. What exists? Who has seen it? And why hasn't it led to more definitive outcomes? Then came another shift, this time focusing on how the information has been handled publicly. Massie brought up the release of documents. The timing. The fact that some materials were shared quickly, even to individuals outside formal oversight channels. He pointed out that in that rush, some victim names were allegedly not properly redacted, which raises a different kind of concern. Not about hidden information, but about exposed information. About whether the process meant to protect victims actually failed them. That contrast hit hard. On one hand, claims that powerful individuals are being protected through lack of disclosure. On the other, claims that victims were exposed due to rushed releases. It creates a narrative that feels inconsistent, and that inconsistency is what keeps people watching. Because it suggests that something about the system isn't working the way people expect it to. And just when it seemed like the conversation couldn't get more complex, it expanded beyond the hearing room. Because the broader context started to come into play. Discussions about leadership, about transparency, about trust in institutions. And at the same time, completely different headlines were unfolding. International tensions rising, military movements being reported, economic pressures building. It might seem unrelated at first, but there's a connection beneath it all, because whether it's a domestic investigation or a global conflict, the core issue is the same. People want clarity. They want to know what's happening, why decisions are being made, and whether the information they're being given is complete. And when answers feel partial or uncertain, confidence starts to drop. You can see it in polls, in reactions, in the way stories like this spread so quickly online that AS reports came in about rising tensions overseas, about negotiations breaking down and forces being moved. The sense of uncertainty grew even larger. Different story, same feeling. Questions without clear answers. Decisions happening behind the scenes. And the public trying to piece it all together from fragments. It's not just about one hearing or one case. It's about a pattern of information that feels incomplete, and that's what brings everything back to where it started. Those documents, those alleged names, the statements made under questioning. Because at the center of all of this is a simple idea. If information exists, people expect it to lead somewhere. To action, to clarity, to resolution. But when it doesn't, the questions don't disappear. They multiply. So now the situation stands like this. A congressman claims there are documents naming multiple powerful individuals. An official acknowledges the existence of files, but emphasizes previous reviews and lack of credible evidence. Questions about additional connections remain unanswered. Concerns about how information is handled continue to grow. And the public is left trying to make sense of it all. But maybe the most important part isn't what was said in that room. It's what happens next. Because hearings end, statements get recorded. But investigations, if they happen, take time. And transparency, if it comes, doesn't always come quickly. So the real question isn't just about what's in those files. It's about whether anything will be done with them. And that's the part no one can answer yet. Not definitively, not clearly. Because until something changes, until new information is confirmed, new actions are taken, or new details are made public, the story stays in this space between what's known and what's suspected. And that space is where attention stays the longest. So as you think about everything that was said, everything that was questioned, and everything that still isn't clear, ask yourself this. If the files are real, and if the names are in them, what's the next step? Because whatever that answer is, it's going to matter a lot more than anything that's already been said. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more deep dives into stories like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.